the language and power lesson. And in the language and power lesson folder that you're looking here, you'll find this this presentation. I'm going to change this really quick to 2022. So I'm going to go through this presentation with you. It does say that you can go through it on your own. You don't need to do the Pear Deck, but I'm going to go through it with you right now, and then I'm going to explain the assignment for here. All right. So our objectives for today are to think a little bit about language, and so how we, our language. What is language, and how does it relate to culture? What is language loss, and what effects does it have on a group of people? What are the causes of language loss, and how have people fought back against language loss? So language is a set of sounds and symbols that are used for communication. Language is an incredibly important part of culture. And so language reflects where a culture has been and what it values, and language makes people in a culture visible to each other. And so if we were in class right now, we would be doing some of these questions, but I would ask you as a class, how many of you English is not your first language? And what your experience has been with language. And kind of the big point here is if English is your first language, we probably don't think too much often about language and how it's an important part of our culture because we live in an English-speaking society. But for those of us who do not speak English as our first language, or maybe are in a situation where, our common language is not the dominant language, we realize how important that is. The other, this next piece is about just the language and the spread of language, particularly of English. English is becoming the most dominant language in the world. And if we take a look at people's first languages, Chinese is the most spoken language in the world. And at least that's people's first language. Spanish is number 2 and English is number 3. But English is the most common second language. So even though a lot of people speak other languages as their first language, they oftentimes also speak English as a way to communicate across people of different languages. English is the most common language used by far on the internet. And even though, internet users are speaking many different languages, many of them are actually writing in English just to be able to communicate with each other because so many people know English as their second language. And so we're able to communicate across multiple different languages using English. So the big thing we're going to talk about today, though, is language loss. And so there are about 6,000 languages spoken worldwide, but 96% of these languages are spoken by just 3% of the world population. And the estimates predict that about 50% of the world's indigenous languages will be extinct by 2100. Some say that it'll be 95%. Some say that 95% will at least be seriously endangered. So first of all, let's define a couple terms. So indigenous languages are languages that are spoken by a native group of people who have not migrated far from their homeland. So they are native to a particular area. To have an extinct language means you have no living members of that language anymore. And endangered means that you have very few living members of a particular language. And so indigenous languages are not only a way to communicate, but they also are extensive and complex systems of knowledge that have developed over millennia. And so to lose a language doesn't just mean that you are going to have a harder time communicating, but it's really meaning that you have lost a lot of you've maybe lost some of your culture's knowledge and history and just culture. So languages are essential to the identity of indigenous people, and preservation of their cultures, worldviews, and visions are an expression of self-determinism. When indigenous languages are under threat, so too are indigenous people themselves. And so this map, if you click on it, is the endangered, are a number of endangered languages throughout the world. And so you can kind of play around with it. You can zoom into like Minnesota and you'll see Ojibwe as an endangered language. But there's about 5,000 speakers left of Ojibwe. And a lot of these languages that you see here are indigenous languages, are native languages to to the United States, or in the United States. So why are there so many languages that are threatened or that are close to endangered? Well, here are a few reasons. The global diffusion of English and other dominant languages. So colonialism, which we'll speak more about in our next unit, but the spread, the takeover by European countries of many parts of the world included the destruction of indigenous languages and indigenous culture, and the dominance of English and other colonial languages. English is also becoming the language of trade and business, and it's oftentimes used in popular culture. So even though, for example, like we talked about K-pop bands, which are South Korean, popular, like a pop type of music, right? And bands that come out of South Korea, many of them are writing their music in English because they want it, in order for something to diffuse worldwide, English is going to be the language that's most likely going to be used. And so because of that, people are less likely to use their own language. The second one is a forced assimilation efforts. So throughout the last couple hundred years, many indigenous languages have been forced out of people. In our country, American Indian boarding schools were used as tools to remove American Indians from reservations and to force them to speak English. And there was this idea that in order to be successful, you needed to speak proper English. And then just theft of land and genocide. And so in this country, the indigenous population or the native population is just less because of loss of land and the murder of American Indians. So colonization, as we'll get to in our next unit, is really this idea that this is, for example, all the countries that were once colonized by Great Britain. And so you can see how English would have diffused globally. You can see evidence of English in downtown Japan. So if I look at this photo here, I can see American companies. I can see, use of I can see use of English words, so cosmetics right here. And then this is an example of an American Indian boarding school where all children were forced to go, taken from their families, forced to wear traditional European dress. And this is Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. So this is a interview with a elder from a tribe in Alaska. It says no one is allowed to speak the language, the Dena'ina language. The American government didn't allow it in the schools, and a lot of women had married non-mated men, and the men said, "You're American now, so you can speak the language." So we became invisible to the community, invisible to each other. And then because we couldn't speak the language, what happens when you can't speak your own language is that you have to think with someone else's words, and that's a dreadful kind of isolation. So many groups have fought back. The United Nations has declared that all people worldwide have language rights. And there's been plenty of a revitalization effort. So when these languages become endangered, many people try to bring them back. And ways that they do so are through laws that protect the language, through language immersion schools, radio and TV programs, online music and smartphone apps that teach the languages. And today you're going to be looking at some case studies, particularly case studies of Hawaiian and Ojibwe. But also there is a case study that you're gonna get to choose which one you want to do, but you could choose Ebonics. And Ebonics is a dialect of English, particularly spoken by African Americans. And if you do that one, you're going to be taking a look at the debate over whether or not Ebonics should be used in schools or taught in schools. And that goes to this idea that oftentimes people have views of what is correct English, and trying to teach someone correct English can oftentimes be really harmful to their own culture. So going back to the folder, you're going to choose one of the case studies. And in the folder, you're going to find the 3 case studies here. But if you go to the assignment is going to also have all the links here. However, the folders are a little bit nicely set up, and you're going to choose one. So you're going to go through the material. There are some podcasts or some videos, and you are going to answer the 6 questions about the case study that you choose. So that's the lesson. Let me know if you have any questions.